Alright, in this lecture, we're going to go over values. So what are values? Well, values are just how light or dark a color is. And it's based off of this spectrum right here, or this value chart. So it goes from black all the way up to white. And then everything in between is just a blend between those colors. So this black right here and this white right here, if you mix them together, you get this center color right here. And then if you were to mix this center color with this black color, you would get this center color right there. And it goes on and on. Now, this is broken up into 11 different values, but really the value spectrum is infinite. There's values in between each one of these values. And so basically you use these different values to create different lights and shadows and shading. Now let's have a look at some examples of values. So here I have a black and white photograph of these shoes hanging from a telephone wire. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and use my eyedropper tool, which is a tool that allows me to select any color I want in my image, and it'll show me what the color is right over here in this little box. So I'm going to go ahead and use this to find each value in my picture, and then I'm going to try to match that value with my value up here. As I do this, I want you to guess also. So let's start with this color right here. It appears to be white. So let's go ahead and then switch over to our brush tool and try painting that on our white. And it's just barely a little bit darker than white, but pretty dang close. So it probably would go somewhere in between these two right there. Now let's try another color. So I'm going to select this gray right here, and then I want to guess which one it is. So I'm going to guess that this is a mid-tone gray, and I was way off. So it's very good to test this and practice with trying to figure out what values are what. But another thing to understand is that depending on what value is next to another value, that'll change how dark or how light it looks. So this doesn't look so dark because it's next to a darker gray. So this gray right here, this one that looks like almost white, is actually probably more of our mid-tone gray. So I would put it right there, and I was correct. So now let's reselect this color right here, and I would say this one goes with that one. Pretty dang close. Let's try another one. So this darker gray down here, I'm gonna guess that it's not black, but I would guess that it is this gray right there, and I was wrong. It's this darker one. And so it's kind of fun, but it's also really useful to do this and test out how well you see value in images. It's also a really good way to see how values play off of each other, because like I showed you over here, this almost looks like a white, but it turns out that it's this light gray right there. Let's try one more value on here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select this value right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and try to find that. So I'm going to guess that that's my middle gray, and I was correct on that one. Now, I don't think there's actually any black in this image right here. Let's try another image. So right here we have an image of a building, and I'm not even sure if there's any black on this. If there were any black, it would probably be this down here in this window. Let's go ahead and try painting with that, and it is black. All right, let's try another color. So let's try this right here. So this may appear black, but it might actually just be a dark gray. And it's not, it's somewhere in between. So it's a dark gray, but it's not completely black. Let's try another color. So let's try this one right here. And we'll try painting with that. I think it would go right there. Pretty dang close. Let's try another one. So if we grab this gray right there, I'm going to guess that it's with this guy. Now let's try one more. So this over here appears to be a really light gray, but I'm going to guess that it's not as light as you think it is. I would probably put it somewhere around here, and it is closer to this one. So it's our middle gray. So it's really important to start studying values in things. And I know it can be kind of hard when you're looking at things in color, but if you're able to find some black and white photos, I want you to study those photos and try to figure out what values are being used in that photo. And if you can test it out in Photoshop, that would be even better. Okay, let's go ahead and hop back over to our paper and pencil and try some stuff out with values. All right, now what I want to do is I want to go over how to create values with your pencil. So we had a look at them in Photoshop, but now how do you create that with your pencil? Well, it all has to do with the pressure that you push on your pencil. And so right now we're going to practice creating that pressure to create whatever value we want. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to draw a rectangle like so. And then what I want to do is I want to create my value spectrum within this rectangle, but we're not going to break it down into separate sections like we saw in Photoshop. We just want to do one gradual gradient from our darkest color all the way up to white. So let's go ahead and do that. So basically we just want to start by pushing pretty hard down here, and then we want to slowly get softer as we get up to this other side. And you really have to be paying attention to about where you are on your rectangle, and you have to pay attention to how hard you're pushing. Because when you get back right about here in the middle, you want to have your midtone, and as you're getting over to here, you want the middle tone between this midtone and white. And then it's the same on this side. When you get to about the middle here, you want it to be basically the midtone between this dark color and the midtone. Now, even this still isn't looking perfect, so we can continue to keep shading it in until we get it looking correct, because we want it to be as even as possible. And even down here needs to be a lot darker, so I'm going to push harder now. Alright, I think that looks much better. So now we have a nice gradual gradient from our darkest color all the way to our lightest color or value. So I want you to practice this so that way you can get really good control of your pencil. And now what I want to do is I want to go over drawing a sphere again, but we're going to break down the different values within that sphere. So let's go ahead and start with drawing our circle. So there's our circle. Now let's have the light source coming from over here, and then let's go ahead and start adding in our shadows. So I'm going to add in my shadows about here, and then we want to make sure that we're using cross contouring, so we're going along with the form of the shape. All right, perfect. Now let's go ahead and add in our core shadow on top of that midtone. So add in that core shadow there. And then we'll leave in that bounce light right there on that edge. And if you don't remember, bounce light is just the light that's being bounced off of the surface that your ball is sitting on. So now let's go ahead and add in a contouring line around this just so we can see our ball a little bit better. So that was a little bit off, but that's all right. And then we can go ahead and add in our cast shadow. So our cast shadow is going to be about there. And then we'll go ahead and fill that in. Just like so. All right, perfect. Now let's have a look at this and figure out what type of values we have going on in here. So first off, we have our highlight. And in this case, our highlight is our white. And in other cases, your highlight might be a little bit darker than light, but your highlight is always going to be the brightest value on the spectrum. Next, we have our midtone. So this midtone right here is basically this midtone right here in the middle. But as it fades from the midtone to the white, we get some of these other values in here that are between these two values. Then our next value is going to be our core shadow, which generally is the darkest value or close to the darkest value. In every case, your shadows are not going to be completely black. Sometimes they're a really light gray. And then once we get to that core shadow, next is the bounce light. The bounce light is sort of a mid-tone gray, but it's a little bit darker, and so we want to come a little bit more to this side, so our mid-tone gray is somewhere in there. And then next is our cast shadow, and our cast shadow pretty well matches this core shadow, so it starts out as a dark black, and then as we get to the end, it fades into more of a mid-tone gray. So what I want you to do is I want you to start viewing things not only as geometrical shapes and forms, but now I want you to start viewing things in their values. So when you look at an object, I want you to start thinking about what's the value of that object. For example, this blue pencil, even though it's blue, it has a darker value than this white paper. And you can tell because if you squint your eyes and look at this image, the blue pencil and the white paper, they definitely stand out, and there's a lot of contrast between them because of the difference in value. There's all other types of objects, such as this pink eraser. The black area on the pink eraser is a lot darker than the pink part, and so the pink has a lighter value than this black area. So definitely start looking at things in that way, and it'll really start changing the way you create artwork. Alright, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned about contrast and the contrast spectrum, and how it goes from black all the way up to white, and there's every single value in between. So don't forget that value is one of the most important parts when it comes to drawing. Value gives you your highlights and shadows, and it also gives you contrast. And without contrast, artwork would not look very good. And in the next few lectures, we're going to get more into contrast and how it works and why it makes things look so good.